Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to take a look at the operations and management services in Google Cloud Platform. Now, one thing to point out is that I pulled some of the management services that might otherwise belong in here and put them in the security section, so consider things like Resource Manager included by reference. Alright, let's start with Stackdriver. Now, Stackdriver is not just a single service, it's actually a family of services for monitoring, logging, and diagnosing apps on Google Cloud Platform and on AWS. Now, this is a lot like Amazon's CloudWatch family of services, and when taken together, it's kind of similar to some other ops and monitoring tools, but we'll get into more specifics later when we look at each service. Now, Stackdriver is automatically deeply integrated into the Google App Engine applications, but it's also possible to integrate these things into other applications too. Now, Stackdriver has a free basic tier, which is supposed to be only for GCP services. This has a shorter retention period, smaller storage, and some additional limitations. The premium tier supports both GCP and AWS services, and it charges you per resource month, prorated hourly. Now, you should check Stackdriver's pricing documentation for what constitutes a chargeable resource, because it can get a little complicated. Anyway, the premium tier also includes user-defined metrics and lets you use the VM monitoring agent. Speaking of monitoring, let's take a look at Stackdriver Monitoring. This service gives you visibility into the performance, uptime, and overall health of your cloud applications, and it's based on CollectD. You might compare this to CloudWatch's metrics and dashboards, or to something like Datadog, and if you were doing it on your own, you might use the CollectD service. Now, this includes a number of built-in and custom metrics, dashboards, uptime monitoring from a number of locations globally, and alerts. And a theme we'll see with Stackdriver is that you can follow the trail. You can link from the alert to the dashboard or chart, to logs, and to traces, which all really helps when you're trying to debug a problem quickly. Now, Stackdriver monitoring is cross-cloud. Of course, it supports GCP, but the monitoring agent does also support Amazon Web Services. Now, you can set up some interesting alerts here, and you can configure it to include multi-condition rules and resource organization. And when you do get an alert, you can have it sent out by email, by the GCP mobile app, or if you're paying for the premium tier, a whole bunch of other different things. Now, aside from the premium tier, what you might pay for here is for going over your allotment of custom or logs-based metrics. Next, we have Stackdriver Logging. This will let you store, search, analyze, monitor, and alert on log data and events, and it's based on FluentD. This compares to CloudWatch logs, or you might use a service like Splunk. If you're doing it on your own, you might build your own system around FluentD. Now, log collection is built into some of the GCP services. You can also collect logs from AWS with an agent, or you can custom send any logs you have through the Stackdriver Logging API. As before, the integration with the other Stackdriver services can really help you debug issues quickly. Stackdriver Logging lets you create real-time metrics from the log data and then alert on them or chart them in dashboards. That can be quite powerful when you're running a system. And if you need to do some advanced analytics or use SQL-like querying, you can send your log data in real time to BigQuery. Stackdriver Logging also includes a powerful interface to browse, search, and slice the log data. And when logs are about to expire, you can instead decide to export them to GCS. In terms of how you pay for this, there's a base allotment per project per month of how much you're allowed to store. But if you pay for the premium tier of Stackdriver, then each chargeable resource will increase your hourly allotment. That's a bit complicated, so I do recommend that you read the documentation on how that works. Stackdriver Error Reporting will count, analyze, aggregate, and track crashes in a helpful centralized interface. Now, I'm not entirely sure what best to compare this to, so if you have some ideas, please post them in the forum. Now, maybe you might compare this to something like PagerDuty, but to my knowledge, what they offer isn't nearly so integrated and dev-oriented. So Stackdriver Error Reporting will smartly aggregate errors into meaningful groups, and it understands things about the language and framework to be able to do that well. When a new error doesn't group together with existing ones, then it'll instantly alert you, and that notification will link directly to the error details, including a time chart, occurrences, affected user count, first and last seen dates, and a cleaned stack trace. Now, the parser that cleans up those exception stack traces understands Java, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, C#, PHP, and Go programming languages. And when you're looking at it, you can jump straight from the stack frame to the source to start debugging. Charges here are just the standard Stackdriver ones. Stackdriver Trace is a service that tracks and displays call trees and timings across distributed systems to let you debug performance. Now this compares to AWS's X-Ray service, or if you were setting this up on your own, you might use something like Zipkin or OpenTracing with one of its supported tracers. This automatically captures traces from Google App Engine, but there's also a Trace API and SDKs that you can use, so you can capture traces from anywhere. Now if you're already using Zipkin, there is a Zipkin collector that can let you turn Zipkin tracers into Stackdriver tracers. It sits as a go-between, translates the calls, and sends the data along. With Stackdriver Trace, you can take a look at the aggregate app latency information, or you can dig into individual traces so you can debug the problems. You can generate reports whenever you want them, or you can get automatic reports daily for each traced application. And Stackdriver Trace is actually smart enough to watch your app's latency over time, and it can let you know about any app latency shift. Now there's no charge for the Stackdriver Trace service, but if you're using a GCP free tier account, the calls to Stackdriver Trace will be quite throttled. Now note that this is not the Stackdriver pricing tier, this is actually the Google Cloud Platform billing tier. Next up we have Stackdriver Debugger. This is a service that can grab program state, including call stack, variables, and expressions, from live deployments with very low impact. You can set log points that will fire every time that particular piece of code is hit for the next 24 hours, or you can set a snapshot point that has more information, and although that'll only run once per time you enable it, you can make it conditional so that it'll capture exactly the circumstance you want to debug. Now when you're viewing source code through the Stackdriver Debugger UI, you can browse things that are connected to either Google Cloud Source repositories, GitHub repositories, or Bitbucket repositories. And if your code's not in one of those spots, then you can either upload a snapshot of your code, or if you're using Chrome, you can have it work on files that are just stored locally. But you can also just skip the web UI entirely and give it a file and a line number. That's actually all it needs to set the log points or snapshot points. In terms of application support, Stackdriver Debugger supports Java and Python on Google Compute Engine, Google Kubernetes Engine, and both standard and Flex versions of Google App Engine. If you're using Node.js or Ruby, that's supported on Google Compute Engine, Google Kubernetes Engine, and Google App Engine Flex, but Go is only supported on GCE and GKE. If you are using Google App Engine, this is automatically enabled for you. Otherwise, you can set up some agents that'll do the work for the other ones. A nice thing about Stackdriver Debugger is that you can share a debugging session with a coworker just by sending them the URL, and it's also nice that this is free to use. Cloud Deployment Manager is a powerful service that'll let you create and manage resources via declarative templates. This is infrastructure as code. This compares quite directly to AWS's CloudFormation service, or something like HashiCorp's Terraform. So how this works is that you tell Cloud Deployment Manager what GCP resources you want it to make, and it'll make them for you. And because you're telling it what you want to wind up with rather than how to make each of them, it can automatically parallelize a lot of these things. You can specify your templates in YAML, or you can use Python or Jinja too. So that you can combine templates together or use them programmatically, this supports input and output parameters, and you can even use a JSON schema for them. And both when you're creating a new deployment or updating one, you can see a preview of what's going to happen. Deployment Manager is a free service. You just wind up paying for the resources that are involved in your deployments. Cloud Billing API is an interesting service that can let you programmatically manage your billing for GCP projects and get GCP pricing information. This compares to AWS's Billing API, but if you were doing this on your own, you'd probably be spending a lot of time in something like Excel. You can get billing configuration information like the list of billing accounts or the details about and the associated projects for each of those billing accounts. You can also enable, disable, or change which billing account is associated with a particular project. On the pricing side of things, you can get a list of the billable SKUs and the public pricing information for each of those, including different billing tiers. Another way you can use this API is to get information like regional availability to find out where each service is available. Now, if you're looking for your current bill information, that's unfortunately not available through the Cloud Billing API at this time, but you can set up an automatic export of your current bill to either GCS or BigQuery, and that's something you configure via the console. Alright, if you have any questions about any of this, please let me know. If not, please feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.